So I'd now like to present our presenter, Pam Hinds. Pam Hinds is professor and director of the Center on Work, Technology, and Organization in the Department of Management Science and Engineering. She studies the effect of technology on teams and collaboration. Pam has conducted extensive research on the dynamics of cross-boundary work, teams, particularly those spanning national borders. She's also published extensively on the relationship between national culture and work practices, particularly exploring how work practices or technology created in one location are understood and employed at distant sites. Pamela also has a body of research on human-robot interaction in the work environment and the dynamics of human-robot teams. Most recently, Pamela has been looking at the changing nature of work in the face of emerging technologies, including the nature of coordination in open innovation, changes in work and organizing results from 3D printing, and the work of data analysts. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Pam.
Great. Thank you so much, Megan. So in this webinar, we're going to talk, as Megan said, about how to lead and not just survive digital transformation. We're going to discuss some of the critical factors for digital transformation, and in particular, those foundational aspects that differentiate organizations that are prepared and more likely to be successful in taking advantage of the opportunities that digital technologies provide. So first, what I want to do is talk about what digital transformation is. There are actually a number of different definitions out there. The first one is from Salesforce. They say that it is the process of using digital technologies to create new or modify existing business processes, culture, and customer experiences to meet changing business and market requirements. It's a fairly all-encompassing definition, which allows for more modest as well as more dramatic change within the organization. The second definition is one by George Westerman, who's a research scientist at MIT. And he says that it's a radical rethinking of how an organization uses technology, people, and processes to fundamentally change business performance. So this is a little bit more narrow definition, which focuses more on radically rethinking and fundamentally changing the business. The third one from Gartner is more narrow yet. They argue that it is about exploiting digital technologies and supporting capabilities to create a robust new digital business model. So this is a little bit more narrow because it's really focused on changing the business model rather than, for example, just internal processes. For this course, my definition is closer to the last two. I think it's digital transformation is really more than just minor changes, minor tweaking within the organization, but transformational in that we're talking about radically rethinking oftentimes your business model and fundamentally changing how business is done. I also want to point out that in all of these definitions, we're talking about the entire business. We're not talking about just changing finance or just changing manufacturing. It's really the entire organization that ends up getting touched by digital transformation. We'll talk more about that later. Evidence from the World Economic Forum and others suggests that investing in new business models is probably the most difficult and certainly the most frequently targeted within organizations across industries. And this is in part because it requires significant cultural change in order to make that kind of a dramatic transformation. So I also want to talk a little bit about the emerging technologies that we're referring to when we talk about digital transformation. Oftentimes in the same breath, we're talking digital transformation and these emerging disruptive kinds of technologies. Those technologies are going to be most likely to shake up businesses and shake up industries. So let's go down the list here. On the top right-hand or left-hand quadrant rather, we have the Internet of Things. And that refers to any physical device which can be connected to the internet, but isn't used to directly access the web like smartphones or computers. The analyst firm Gartner says that by 2020, there will be over 26 billion connected devices, everything from refrigerators to cars to activity sensors, medical monitoring, and a whole host of other applications. Then we've got autonomous vehicles and drones that can move people and things around without necessarily having a human driver or controller there. We've got robotics, and robotics operate in a whole host of domains, including industrial robots, manufacturing settings, but also in the home, in operating rooms, in the fields picking apples, and so on and so forth. Some of these may be more autonomous, some of them less so, but we're seeing a lot of robotics out there. 3D printing is also anticipated to be a disrupting technology and could potentially radically change manufacturing and where parts end up getting made around the world. AI, that's the one that we hear about most often, and of course there are numerous applications to AI, and we'll talk about a few examples over the course of the webinar. Big data, data analytics, and cloud, also really important, discussed really frequently, and we'll talk about that a bit more as well. Virtual reality and augmented reality, that's a technology that is still developing, and it's not quite clear exactly what all the applications of that may end up being. The photograph on this slide is of virtual reality being used to train employees to be more empathic. And that is one of the applications that we're beginning to see out there, is training and giving people this more immersive experience so that their training is more effective. Then, of course, we've got digital traceability and blockchain, which is being discussed quite a bit, and social media and platforms, which have been out there for quite some time, but can make a huge difference in terms of the information that's available and who the information is shared with and how. Although AI gets a lot of the attention, all of these technologies have been identified as potential disruptors to products, to companies, and to industries. The Internet of Things, for example, is already being used for water supply management in rice fields in Malaysia, and as magic bands at Disney, which allows park goers at Disneyland to manage their entire park experience through a band that they wear on their wrist. So one question that we often get asked is, how is the disruption that we're anticipating today different than in the past with personal computers, smartphones, and so forth? And there are a number of things that we believe are different. One is just the pace and velocity of change. Krieger at the World Economic Forum argued that it took 75 years for 100 million people to get access to the telephone, and yet the gaming app Pokemon Go hooked that many users in less than 1 month in 2016. So just really, really rapid adoption of these technologies. The number of patents related to these technologies grew at a rate of 54% from 2015 to 2017. So again, just the pace, the velocity of change, both in terms of invention and adoption, are really outstanding and unprecedented. Another difference is the holistic nature. Many of these technologies are combined to offer products, services, and change business models. When combined, if you're combining AI and robotics, for example, or combining the Internet of Things is often combined with AI, with data analytics, and so forth. And these combinations tend to unleash capabilities that can exceed what is possible when they're deployed separately, and certainly exceed what we have seen before. Data is also a huge aspect here of what is different. As I'm sure most of you, all of you know, there are just vast amounts of data out there readily available about customer behavior, customer preferences, employee behaviors, behaviors of machines, and so forth. There's just a ton of information that can be scraped, that is available to organizations, that can be stored, and we now have computational approaches that allow us to deal with these huge quantities of data in order to analyze and rapidly adjust products and services and products that we want to offer. And then finally, flows of information. And this is large part because of social networks. Data can flow much more easily, often outside the control of the organization, where information gets put out there by customers, by suppliers, and so forth. And that can go viral. It can affect stock prices. It can affect customer attitudes toward what it is an organization is offering. So with that brief introduction, we've got another poll. And what I'd like to know is what your experience is. So think about the industry that you're in and consider how one or more of these technologies might disrupt that industry. So I'll give you a minute to complete that poll. Okay, so it looks like the vast majority of you believe that there is going to be a really significant disruption in your industry. And I think that really jives with some of the research that has been done. A similar question was asked by Jerry Kane and his colleagues in a recent book that came out, The Technology Fallacy, came out a few months ago. And one of the things that they did was they surveyed about 4,000 leaders and employees in a variety of industries. And as you can see from this slide, about 87% anticipated at least moderate digital disruption, and 59% expected great digital disruption. According to the World Economic Forum, most industries are going to be heavily affected. And that includes aviation, travel and tourism, chemistry, advanced materials, mining and metals, oil and gas, professional services, retail, telecom, automotive, electricity, healthcare, logistics, media, financial services, and so on and so forth. The point being that very few industries, if any, are going to be immune from this digital disruption. And that's another change from past trends. In the past, what we saw is that an industry or a subset of industries might be affected by the introduction of a new technology. And with the technologies today that we're seeing, they're just really widespread. Here's another, the results of another survey item from Kane and colleagues. And in this one, they asked people to the extent to which they agreed that their organization is adequately preparing for these disruptions. And as you can see, only about 44% believe that their organizations are adequately preparing. And multiple studies, multiple articles bear this out. So people are generally expecting a huge shift, huge disruption, and yet most people are feeling like their organizations, their industries are inadequately prepared to deal with the disruption that is on its way. Here's another chart that was in the book Leading Digital by George Westerman and his colleagues. And one of the things that they did is they looked at what they called digital masters. And digital masters are organizations where they have both the leadership to carry out these changes and the digital capabilities to carry out these changes. And as you can see from this chart, banking, high tech, insurance to a little bit lesser extent seem to have a higher percentage of digital masters than, for example, pharmaceuticals, utilities, and to some extent consumer packaged goods. So there is variance in industries in terms of their level of preparation. So what does digital transformation look like within an organization? One thing is new efficiencies. So a lot of people talk about just using these technologies to do things faster, to do things better, to reduce numbers of errors, and so forth. One example of that is Siemens. They digitized a major electronics plant in Germany a few years ago to the extent that it was 75% automated. As a result of deploying these technologies, they increased their output by a factor of 10, significantly decreased defects, and increased the speed of production. So really getting a lot of advantage out of that transformation. Better customer experience. That's another goal of most digital transformation efforts. And the hope is to deploy products and services that customers enjoy more and build customer loyalty and support. One example there is the Marriott hotel chain. They have been able to personalize the entire travel journey using extensive customer data. They even have AI-powered bots mostly for their more technologically savvy customers. But the bots enable people to, for example, change reservations and so forth much more easily. And what they've reported is that they're seeing increase in customer loyalty and also increases in market share, and attribute that to the advances that they're making using these technologies. Now, doing business differently is when we're really beginning to talk about more fundamental business model changes. One way to think about this is it's a matter of paying attention to what is out there, what's going on in the market, what the technologies are, and using that information to disrupt your industry from within, not waiting for Airbnb, Uber, and so forth to execute the disruption for you. One example is DHL. They're a logistics company shipping things around the globe. And one of the things that they've noticed is that 3D printing is likely to come on the scene, and to the extent that it does, in a big way anyway, it will disrupt logistics. It will disrupt the need to move products as they have been in the past. So as a result, they're incorporating 3D printing into their core services, in a sense, internally disrupting the logistics industry. Generally, continual innovation. When we look at organizations that are successful in digital transformation, we see continual innovation. They have set themselves up as an innovation company and have innovation forward cultures. And then the last one, in some ways, is the most important, and that is we often talk about digital transformation as if you go from state A to state B. And in fact, it's not that, discrete. I mean, you're essentially looking at a continuous dynamic process. There is no state B, there is no end goal. The idea is that it's really about digitally transforming and having an organization, a foundation that supports this kind of constant change. So those are the organizations that are most successful in achieving digital transformation or digital transforming. You know, they've got a foundation and they are prepared for this ongoing dynamic change. Okay, so we've got one last poll here. So my question to you is, given all of this that we've been talking about, what's required, in your opinion, for digitally transforming? And I'd ask you to check just the top 3, and it's not that the others aren't important, but I'd like you to really prioritize. What would you focus on first? Okay, hopefully everyone's had a chance to respond here. So of course, all of these are required, but perhaps to varying degrees and in different sequences depending upon where you're at. We tend to hear a lot more about access to digital talent and having an architecture that supports access and integration of data so that you can actually deliver business value. Of course, these are critical and they support these products and services. But we also need a digital culture. We also need some of these organizational aspects. Okay, so I'm going to move on. And it isn't as much about the technology as we might think. And that's one of the things I'm hoping that you'll take away from the webinar today, is that it's not just a pure focus on the technology, but it requires an understanding of digital trends and technology, as well as some of these organizational aspects, changes to culture and practice. So here are a few quotes from the Kane et al. Book. This is not about the tools, but the ability to operate effectively in an environment dominated by those tools. Rogers, in his book, the Digital Transformation Playbook, says digital transformation is not about the technology, it's about strategy and new ways of thinking. In an HBR article, Burt and Shipilov say, it's really a myth that digital is about the technology. Westerman, in a Sloan Management Review article, says that digital isn't the answer. Transformation is really what we should be focusing on. And an even more extreme view, in an article in McKinsey Quarterly, Caitlin and colleagues say, while technical capabilities are crucial, a strong and adaptive culture can actually help make up for the lack of them. So, too much focus on technology, the evidence suggests, can distract the business from focusing on the vision of what a transformed business needs to look like and what that means for customers. So, really keeping a focus, having that technology background, having the technology talent is critical, but we also really need to keep focused on building an organization that can support the development of the innovation that's required. This is another study that was done. This is actually a survey of 25 industry and research consulting panelists across a variety of industries. One of the things that was interesting about this is these are really experienced people. So they had, on average, a little under 10 years of experience in digital transformation. And for the most part, they held senior positions like CEO, chief digital officer, and so forth. And what this suggests, and the numbers here are the percentage of panelists who selected this item as one of the top 10 choices as being important for successful digital transformation. And as you can see, a lot of these values that they've identified really get to the culture of the organization. So openness toward change, focusing on the customer, being willing to learn, innovation, agility, knowledge sharing, attitude toward failure, cooperation, and so forth. So what I've done is I've parsed it a little bit differently, but captured all of what was in that last chart that we saw, and I've distilled sort of what is in the research and what the opinions of experts have been who are leading these digital transformations. And I'm focusing on these 5 items. And in the center, you have customer-centric. And that's in the center because all of these capabilities are employed in service of providing customer value, oftentimes through new business models, but just in general, this focus on the customer as a way of leveraging these new technologies. With customer centered as a starting point, the other organizational factors lay the groundwork for digital transforming, including being fast and nimble, being able to move quickly to identify and act on these opportunities. Voracious learning, really focusing on figuring out what you don't know and learning new things. Unbound collaboration, one of the things that we're seeing is that a lot of collaboration, and particularly collaboration across boundaries that is much more fluid is an indicator of success for these organizations that are digitally transforming. And having an appetite for risk, so being willing to take risks, to fail, and to try again. So having a learning-centric culture, a culture that is moving fast, where you've got an appetite for risk, where you've got unbounded collaboration, are all intended to really support the development of these new capabilities. And of course, these are all overlapping. There's a reason that I have all of these together in one diagram. All of them sort of feed on and support one another. Okay. A little bit more on the customer-centric piece. Westerman, in his book, Leading Digital, points out that there are 4 things that digital masters tend to do to transform the customer experience. One is, importantly, they design the customer experience from the outside in, meaning that they really kind of step back and look from the customer's experience. They're taking the customer's perspective, and they are empathizing with the interests, the preferences, and the needs of customers. And then they're designing from that standpoint, as opposed to what we've sometimes traditionally done, which is develop a new technology or develop a new product and then figure out how we might get that out to a particular customer base. Another thing that digital masters do to transform the customer experience is to increase reach and engagement. These companies are really out there engaging with customers, really trying to understand what they care about and talking with them. The third thing that Westerman identified is putting customer data at the heart of the experience. So really gathering this data that are available on what customers are doing, what it is that customers prefer, what their patterns are, and so forth. And then using that as a way to improve the experience. There's a really nice example with Airbnb where they use data and algorithms to provide pricing tips to hosts so that hosts can get more bookings. So they pay attention on a day-to-day basis what customers tend to do, and then based on that, help the hosts understand how they might want to drop or increase their prices in order to maximize the number of people who stay in their Airbnb and the prices that they're getting. And then finally, seamlessly meshing the digital and the physical experience. This is something, again, that digital masters do. For example, Burberry, they have done an excellent job of bringing digital into the retail experience. They have something called a retail theater concept. So if you go into one of these Burberry stores, you can actually watch runway shows live in the store. And if you see something that you really like, you can actually order it via an iPad. So they've blended this digital and in-store experience and created an online experience that really gives you the feel of Burberry. So there's a very narrow line between the in-store experience and the online experience. It's like coming into Burberry's world. Turns out that more people actually see the Burberry brand via digital than through any other medium these days. And they've been rated as Fast Company's top 10 most innovative retail companies as a result of the transformation that they've demonstrated. Okay, so I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in the time that we have on nimble and fast and also unbounded collaboration. So let's start by talking about being nimble and fast. So nimbleness and agility generally refer to being able to act and react quickly, to assess and then rapidly adapt to new situations, changes in the market, changes in technology, and so forth. And those organizations that are successful in digitally transforming tend to be very agile, very nimble. Why is that important for digital transformation? Well, The pace of change, as we talked about before, requires really a constant rethinking of direction and pivoting. Some evidence suggests that a few years is about the most that a company can continue with any one direction with no changes and still be viable. And in some cases, it's going to need to be even more frequent than that. So of course, it's important for digital transformation. Part of that is scanning the environment, identifying hazards, identifying opportunities, formulating strategic initiatives in order to go after those opportunities. And then, of course, an organization has to be able to implement these new ideas, to be able to very quickly pivot, quickly change from offering one product or service to offering another product or service. And that's one of the places that digital masters or organizations that are really successful at doing this really excel and differentiate themselves. So it's really about speed and it's about innovation. So how do you design for nimbleness? One is having an organizational structure that really promotes nimbleness. Many of us have a lot of experience with traditional hierarchies. And hierarchies were designed in order to be reliable, to be efficient, but not necessarily to be quick. And as a result, these traditional hierarchies are breaking down, and they need to be broken down to some extent so that people can work with those that they need to work with in order to really get things done. Often agile organizations are structured as fluid squads that are loosely connected based on the customer needs or particular project initiatives and their interdependencies. So much more fluid structure that can change rapidly. Business processes. Important to think about how projects and activities are organized and managed. We're kind of gone are the days of really extensive, long-term, detailed project plans in favor of sprints or other short time frames to rapidly act, experiment, get feedback, adjust, and then continue on. Oftentimes there are daily stand-up meetings, frequent communications, and so forth in order to be able to align across the business. Systems also need to allow for this fluidity. For example, fluid sharing of information across these squads or teams. Pushing down decision-making to the lowest possible level, to enable rapid action. It also requires systems that provide information at those lower levels, which is much more possible these days than it has been in the past. And we need leaders. Organizations that are successful at doing this have leaders that see themselves as enabling others rather than directing. So micromanagement and digital transformation are really not very compatible because you need people to be able to see what needs to be done and do it and be trusted to move forward. And all of this is sustained by clear vision and priorities. And that's one of the crucial leadership roles, and is pointed out by many experts and a lot of research on digital transformation, is it's crucial that you have a clear vision so that everybody knows the direction that they're moving and they can make decisions and come up with these ideas and meet customer needs in a way that's aligned with that. So it's really about sort of steering the ship in a particular direction and letting everybody know that. Okay, so I'm going to talk just for a couple minutes here about unbounded collaboration. Unbounded collaboration, as I sort of alluded to earlier, the general consensus is that digital transformation requires extensive collaboration across boundaries, including functional boundaries, expertise, organizational boundaries, oftentimes, sometimes geographies, and so forth. And collaboration, unlike in decades past, needs to be much more fluid. So Amy Edmondson at Harvard came up with this idea of teaming versus teams to describe this ongoing process of collaborating with people as needed on a given project. So one of the reasons that this is so important for digital transformation is because diversity is said to be a key driver for innovation, and innovation is central to digital transformation. And we hear this from multiple sources, that without diversity, teams and organizations can't get there. There was a study that was done by Forbes with about 320 or so executives that had direct responsibility for diversity and inclusion programs. These were all global enterprises. Most of them had C-level titles or board members, and they were all across the globe. And as you can see here, when asked the question, the extent to which they agree that a diverse and inclusive workforce is crucial to encouraging different perspectives and ideas that drive innovation, 85% agreed with that. So, in general, that seems to be the consensus. But is that true? It turns out that decades of research say, maybe not. It kind of depends. So this is some work, sort of a stylized graph based on some of Lee Fleming's work at Harvard. And what you can see in this graph is two things that I think are really important. One is that as the diversity of team members' disciplines goes up, the value of innovations on average goes down, which is the complete opposite of what we tend to believe, at least should be happening. But at the same time, if you look in the upper right-hand quadrant, the only time that you have breakthrough innovations is when you have higher levels of team diversity. And that's sort of the conundrum. So on one hand, you really do have to have high levels of diversity in order to achieve innovation, and yet oftentimes it doesn't work out. Why is this? Oftentimes it is because we don't have strong cultures of collaboration. That's really essential for these digitally successful or those that are transforming using digital. They've got strong cultures of collaboration. They incentivize people for working across boundaries. They emphasize hiring for and developing skill in this cross-boundary collaboration. So there's really an intentional effort to ensure that people are able to work across these boundaries, that they can deal with the kinds of conflicts that come up. They can figure out how to integrate these really different perspectives that ultimately could provide higher levels of innovation. So with that, we'll just wrap up. One of the sort of main things I want to leave you with is that technical skills, digital literacy, and architecture to deliver are all crucial to digital transformation, but so is digital culture. And some would even argue that you have to have that as a foundation. So my definition of digital transformation or digital transforming, which I prefer, is a radical and ongoing rethinking of how an organization employs technology, people, and processes to fundamentally change the customer experience and business performance. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Megan.
Great. Thanks so much, Pam. This is a really important and timely topic, so I hope everyone enjoyed the presentation today. Before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about the program that's sponsoring this webinar today. As Pam noted, we're living in a time of unprecedented change. Digital technologies are continuously disrupting the marketplace and forcing companies to rethink the way they operate. Remaining competitive over the next decade will require much more than just integration of new technology and staying one step ahead of digital disruption. Companies must learn how to strategically utilize this technology and continuously innovate to improve their products, services, and efficiencies, all in support of better customer experience. This program will cover tools and techniques which will teach you and your team what you need in order to thrive in today's tech-driven markets. Registration is open year-round, and you can visit our program website, which has been posted in the Q&A and under the video on the live YouTube channel. I am going to bring some of the common questions over to Pam. So the first one, Pam, is a lot of people asked us very similar questions, so I've moved it into one. So there's a list of industries that they want to know if you think are going to be impacted. So I'm going to read the list, and if there are any that you want to. So it's community medicine, education, travel, food service, hospitality, social services, and local government. They would like to know if any of these you think will be disrupted.
I think all of them. So can you give me each one in the list again?
Community medicine.
Okay, certainly medicine is being heavily affected. For example, there are apps that are being developed that help, for example, those going out into communities to serve those communities and provide data so that in those communities you actually have the information that you need about the people that you're serving.
Yeah, there were several people who asked about education, probably.
Yes, so that's an interesting one because I would say we're not yet seeing a real transformation in education. It's certainly being talked about, but there's just no question. Even if you look at some of the online offerings and webinars, for example, what we're doing now, that wasn't done 5 years ago. But I would put that on the lower end of transformation. And I do believe that in education, there are a multitude of ways that we're going to see over the next 10 years to do a better job of getting educational materials out to groups that wouldn't otherwise have had access, and also to just educate people more effectively.
So one of the other questions that a lot of people, I think I counted 7 people, asked some version of this question. So there's a question around how to get teams to embrace new technology. So if teams or people are, first of all, a little worried about what this technology could do to their job security, but in general, just the reluctance to embrace new technology in different teams. They were wondering if you had any thoughts or advice on how to get people motivated to embrace it.
Yeah, one of the things that has been found in looking at organizations that are more successful at digitally transforming, and this has been true throughout the decades. If you look at what organizations are making dramatic changes, it's often when there's a sense of urgency. It's when it's clear that if you don't change, then you're really going to have a problem with job security, right? So part of it is really helping people to see what the urgency is in the industry in which you're operating. And the challenge here is that, let's look at Airbnb, for example, or let's look at Uber. The taxi industry had no idea that that was coming, right? It's just boom, it's all of a sudden there. And people aren't prepared. Same thing with the hospitality industry and Airbnb. And that makes it hard to create this sense of urgency because you don't necessarily see, this slow moving wave that's coming toward you. So the challenge, I think, is really helping people to see how the disruption has happened in other industries and the ways it could potentially impact the work that they are doing and the business that you're in. So urgency, I think, is absolutely crucial. And the other is oftentimes, when people resist, it's oftentimes because we're afraid. We're afraid that we don't know how to do this new thing. We are afraid that we are going to fail and we're going to be punished for it. We are also potentially afraid that this is a trend and we can wait. So if we wait, that'll be a better strategy. So creating an environment where people feel like they can take time to learn, to try out, to get better at doing what it is that's required is really important. So creating a safe environment in which people can develop the skills that they need, oftentimes will help them to overcome that barrier.
That's great. So one other question that's kind of related was, do you think, in your, your opinion, it would be better to outsource innovation to a firm and then bring it in as more of a directive? So outsourcing a solution and then giving that solution to the teams to execute.
It really depends on the organization. It depends on the industry. So in some cases, so that one of the ideas that is kind of out there when we talk about organizations and how you manage innovation and also continue to do what you do historically as an organization, this idea of exploration versus exploitation. And exploitation is really all about getting value out of what you've already got. So you've had some innovation, you've got some great products and services and so forth, and you want to continue to get value out of those. So you want to exploit those. And often that's really about standard operating procedures, routines, doing things the way that they have been done so that you can be efficient about it. For exploitation or for exploration, that's really about innovation, experimentation, and oftentimes these require really different cultures. So I think part of what's behind that question is, well, if we don't have a culture of innovation, if we've really got an exploitation culture, how can we do the innovation? One option is to outsource. The downside of that is that you never develop the capability within. So on an ongoing basis, again, we're not talking about just this one transformation. We're talking about creating an organization that can continually take advantage of these shifts. So one thing that can be done is you can set up your organization so that you've got some pockets that are exploiting and some pockets that are exploring. And that way you can build the capability within your organization by having a separate culture, in a sense, but also continue to exploit those products. And then you can move the things that you develop into the part of the organization that's just really good at the routine and standard operating procedures.
That's great. Thanks so much, Pam. I know we had so many questions, and this will be sent out as a recording, so people can review. And unfortunately, we're getting close to the hour, so we will have to wrap up the Q&A. But I want to thank Pam so much for this amazing webinar. And as I said before, we have posted the link to the certificate page, both in the Q&A section of the Zoom as well as on the YouTube channel. So everyone, please feel free to check those out, and you'll see that there are many courses that will be coming live in the coming months. We're incredibly excited about this new program, and thank you again so much, Pam, and we'll hopefully talk with everyone soon.